What are the steps in a criminal prosecution? Have you ever wondered what happens when someone is accused of a crime? The process can be complex, but let's break it down step by step. It all starts with an investigation. Law enforcement, such as police officers or sheriffs, will gather evidence, interview witnesses and suspects, and sometimes execute search warrants. If they find enough evidence, they'll write a report and send it to the district attorney's office to file a criminal case. 5. If the police have probable cause, they can arrest the suspect. The person is then taken into custody and booked. If it's a minor offense, they might just get a citation to appear in court later. Otherwise, they'll be held in jail or released on bond. The next step is the initial hearing or arraignment. Here, the judge reads the charges to the defendant, and the defendant can plead guilty, not guilty, or no contest. The judge will also decide on bail and set dates for future proceedings. In federal cases, the government must bring charges through a grand jury. The grand jury listens to the prosecutor's evidence and decides if there's enough to indict the defendant. If they do, an indictment is issued, which is a formal notice of the charges. Before the trial, there are several important steps. The prosecution will provide discovery, which means sharing all the evidence and information they have with the defense. Both sides can file pretrial motions to resolve issues like what evidence can be used in court. 5. At the trial, a jury is selected, and both the prosecution and defense present their cases. The prosecution must prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant committed the crime. The defense can present witnesses and evidence as well, and the defendant has the right to testify or not. 1, 3, 5. After the trial, if the defendant is found guilty, the case moves to sentencing. The judge considers various factors like the nature of the crime, the defendant's criminal history, and any remorse shown. The judge can order imprisonment, supervised release, restitution, or community service. 3. Finally, the defendant has the right to appeal the conviction or sentence. They can ask a higher court to review the case for any errors or injustices. 3. Understanding these steps can help you see how the criminal justice system works to ensure justice is served. How long does it take for a case to go to a grand jury? Have you ever wondered how long it takes for a case to make its way to a grand jury? The answer is not as simple as you might think, because it depends on several factors. First, let's talk about the complexity of the case. If the case involves something simple, like a straightforward crime, it might move quickly. However, if it's a complex case, such as white-collar crimes or large-scale conspiracies, it can take much longer. These cases often require a lot of evidence, including documents, financial records, and digital data, which can slow things down. Another factor is the volume of evidence. The more evidence there is, the longer the grand jury will need to review it. This includes listening to testimonies from witnesses, which can be time-consuming. Grand juries don't meet every day either. They might meet once a week, a few times a month, or even less frequently, depending on the jurisdiction. This irregular schedule can stretch out the investigation. Legal and procedural considerations also play a role. If there are jurisdictional challenges, evidentiary issues, or the need for additional subpoenas, these can extend the investigation's duration. Witness cooperation and availability are also crucial. If witnesses are hard to get a hold of or are uncooperative, it can delay the process. In New York, for example, if the judge decides there's enough evidence after a preliminary hearing, the prosecutor has 45 days to take the case to the grand jury. However, the overall timeline can vary significantly, and in federal cases, investigations can last from a few months to over a year. To give you a better idea, in New York, the prosecutor has 6 months to indict a defendant for a felony charge. If the grand jury indicts the defendant, the case moves forward to trial. So, while there's no one-size-fits-all answer, grand jury investigations typically last anywhere from a few months to a year or more, depending on the specifics of the case. Why does a case go to the grand jury? Have you ever wondered how the legal system decides whether someone should be charged with a crime? It all starts with a grand jury, so let's break it down. A grand jury is a group of citizens, typically between 16 and 23 members, who play a critical role in the criminal justice system. Their main job is to determine whether there's enough evidence to charge someone with a crime. Imagine a grand jury as a filter that helps ensure people aren't unfairly accused. They investigate and protect citizens against unfounded prosecutions. Here's how it works. A prosecutor presents the case to the grand jury, showing them evidence and explaining the law. The grand jury then decides if there's enough evidence to believe a crime was committed and if the person should be formally charged. In federal cases, a grand jury indictment is required for all felonies. This means that for serious crimes, like those punishable by more than a year in prison, the grand jury must decide if there's probable cause to move forward with the charges. The process is quite specific. The grand jury can subpoena documents and witnesses to gather more information. However, these proceedings are not open to the public. They happen in a closed room. Only certain people are allowed in, like the prosecutor, the witness being questioned, interpreters, and stenographers. The grand jury's decision is based solely on the evidence presented by the prosecutor. They don't decide guilt or innocence. That's the job of a trial jury. Instead, they just determine if there's enough evidence to bring formal charges. So why does a case go to the grand jury? It's to ensure that the legal system is fair and that people are not wrongly accused. The grand jury acts as a safeguard, making sure there's solid evidence before someone is charged with a crime.